Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 17th of November 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And where do we go from there? The weather. The weather is pretty gloomy. Apparently, there's some form of Storm Cyril, Brenda, what's it called?
Don't know.
We're not really sure. So it's pretty gloomy, it's pretty dank, raining a lot, and there's apparently a monsoon on the Isle of Man. I'm not sure whether I believe that or not, but I take it it's pretty wet there as well. So gloomy weather, politics even worse, and stay with us as we pick apart what's really happening with the Paris attacks in particular. Where do we start?
We start with cover-up. This is police in Jersey, apparently, having lost. And the lost is in capital letters here from the Daily Mirror, as if this is something surprising. But there's so many examples of this now that it shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody. But the key point about this is that this was an allegation which was originally made in the 1970s, and the police have sat on it ever since and done nothing with it. So it's hardly surprising that that the original statement that was made by Linda Corby, who's an author, was lost. And of course the police saying that, well, it was lost, but we've computerized so much stuff since then that with just some stuff didn't manage to make it onto the computer system. This was one of those. And they have apparently contacted this lady and asked for her to repeat her allegations. The allegations were that she had watched some children from Haute de la Garenne being put on Ted Heath's yacht, and that on one occasion she had counted 11 children being put on the yacht and only counted 10 coming off the yacht when the yacht returned. And she found this suspicious. Now, she wasn't making any particular statement about what might have happened to the child, simply saying that only 10 children came back, and suggesting that the police might like to investigate that. And of course they didn't. So they've now passed this allegation on to Wiltshire Police from Jersey, because Wiltshire Police is apparently running the inquiry into Ted Heath. And the article points out that this has been given the codename Operation Conifer, for what it's worth. So we shall see whether this allegation, this fact, gets lost again.
Well, destroying evidence, losing the stuff, removing data from the Conservative web page. This is all powerful. The course in Britain in 2015. Remember, of course, that David Cameron, I think it was back in March, said that child abuse was a matter of national security. And I think he was absolutely right. That was David Cameron beginning to panic that the exposure of child abuse amongst politicians and Britain's so-called VIP establishment members could bring down the government. Is it part of the evidence or part of the background for the fact that we need terrorism? We'll come on to that in a minute.
Well, speaking of terrorism, oh, sorry, we're not there yet. Well, I suppose we are in a sense. This is the UN Climate Summit is to be held in Paris, of course, beginning on the 30th of this month. Apparently at the G20 meeting, which is taking place in Turkey at the moment, everybody agreed that they were all going to go to this, despite what had happened in Paris last week. But President Hollande has decided that there should be no parties and no demonstrations, and particularly no protests. So all that stuff's cancelled, and they're just really going to close the doors and carry on with their discussions. Now, of course, last week, Vice President Kerry, had made the point that no matter what happens during this climate summit, none of the agreements would be legally binding in any of the nations taking part. President Hollande was pretty upset about that. He said, well, if the agreements aren't legally binding, then there won't be any agreements. So that's kind of the fight that's going on in the background there. But in the meantime, as a result of what happened on Friday, any of the sort of extracurricular stuff is cancelled.
Cancelled, and you don't want people criticising the government. They should just get on and believe what Mr. Holland or David Cameron says, because of course it's the truth. Well, is it? We don't think so. What better man to start with than George Osborne? And here he is. He's an expert already on matters economic. and now he's an expert on security. Islamic State is plotting deadly cyber attacks. That's what Mr. Osborne says. He's going to be visiting GCHQ. He's going to say that IS has already proved its ability to exploit the internet for hideous propaganda purposes. It's a bit similar to the Conservative Party then. And it's also talking about radicalisation and operational planning, all being done over the internet. And the Chancellor is going to warn that IS is also seeking to hack key UK infrastructure in a bid to kill people. So what he's going to do is magic up another 1.9 billion to help fund UK's fight against cybercrime. Where do you think that money is just going to pop up for, Mike?
Where it's going to come from?
Yeah.
Sacking a lot of police officers, maybe?
Yeah, possibly. I just wonder whether he should stick to young ladies, and apparently he likes the odd glass of Coke. This man's not real. So what's going on here? We're supposed to be in austerity measures, but all of a sudden 1.9 billion magicked out of nothing. Well, let's follow it through because, of course, where is the terrorist threat taking us? We've got Chief of the Met Police, Bernard Hogan-Howe, saying, well, what he needs is more armed officers. No worry about the massive cuts in the Met Police. The important thing is to get all the ones that are left armed. We're calling it the Wild West because, of course, this is the man who wanted to get himself on BBC TV to show what a good job he was doing, never mind the accusations of corruption, the failures to investigate child abuse. If you look at what this man is talking about, everything is designed to get more British police armed. Are these policemen, do you think, Mike, you look at them, they look like cheap, off-the-shelf mercenaries? I can't believe anybody would regard these people with their McDonald's burger hats on as being police officers.
Well, we might have a bit of a clue to that later on.
Okay. Well, let's put the two together because, of course, massive intelligence that we're all going to be murdered in our beds by ISIS.
And you can see that massive intelligence in the eyes of those.
ISIS or ISIL. Of course, we haven't got any definition from the government as to what these units really are, but apparently they're all going to kill us. But we've got a bit of problem here because the Herald had an article in which it was quoting Devon and Cornwall police, and they are saying there is no specific intelligence to suggest a threat to the UK or locally. So Devon and Cornwall police have said that we should report anything suspicious, but actually there is no direct threat at the moment to the UK or locally. Now that's pretty interesting, Mike, isn't it? We've got the naval base down here, we've got nuclear submarines. Devon and Cornwall police are confident enough to say, well, what is the threat? And nationally, we've got George Osborne saying, well, it's so serious, we've got to spend £1.9 billion. Somebody is lying. Follow it through. Back to the Met, Hogan-Howe suggested there are up to 4,000 Islamic extremists currently in Britain, with significant numbers of them living in London. Well, just remember that word, suggested. He went on to say that potential terrorists who enter the UK from abroad are more worrying to authorities than homegrown jihadists who are mostly already monitored by security forces.
Did he mean handled?
Handled, probably. Question, is suggestion a sort of a guess? Are there 4,000 Islamic extremists currently in Britain? And if there are, can we just ask who let them in? How did they get in through border controls? And what does mostly mean? Who are mostly already monitored? Does that mean that we're monitoring 60% or 40%?
It is nice to have specific figures.
Specific. This is consistent through all the media reporting at the moment. There is no substantive fact. There is no accurate information. There is no evidence. This is vague guesswork of what's going on. I got to say, Mike, this can only be because this scam being unplayed at the moment on the back of some deaths in Paris is not real. Well, we'll bring in George Osborne again. I apologise for this, but let's reinforce this. What is this money for? If you analyse where they're now going NATO has got a group up to fight ISIS. This is really about getting President Assad out of Syria. But here we are, Britain to hire 2,000 new spies at MI5, MI6 and GCHQ in the wake of Paris terror attacks.
But this headline's disingenuous, isn't it? Because the announcement had already been made about the massive expansion of GCHQ.
Well, this is absolutely true. So we've got old information being recycled, and we're going to give a particular example of that in a moment. Follow the press reports through. They are all over the place. But one of the things we can ask is, how is it that George Osborne, who says there's no money for benefits, there's no money for hospitals, all of a sudden he snaps his finger, well, maybe casts a spell, and out of the magic circle comes £1.9 billion, created from nothing, presumably. Well, of course, it's the French who are leading the charge at the moment with the help of The Guardian. So The Guardian, absolutely full of the whole thing. Lots of stories, lots of spin, lots of half-truths, but nothing of concrete evidence. But we were interested on this front page, not only President Hollande, of course, there. We've also got this little story, which is about a woman hanging out of a window after one of the attacks. The Guardian, of course, is using this as proof that this is ISIS, well, ISIL or IS. And there's a very good analysis on YouTube of this particular incident, which people might like to watch, where somebody is looking very, very closely at the scene, this woman able to hang on by her fingertips for a very long period of time, while very strange events are seen at the back of one of the locations for the attacks. So a lot of people on the internet at the moment don't believe the mainstream media stories, and I believe there's a bit of a backlash on that, Mike, from government sources.
Well, quite a number of the mainstream media now commenting on the comments that are being made on the internet, and they're clearly unhappy about it, shall we say?
Yeah.
But this was a point that Ian Crane was making on the Crane Report last night with Patrick, because he was making the point that in 2001, after the September 11th attacks, there were only a handful of people actually analysing the official story and looking for the mistakes, shall we say. Now there are thousands of people, and it's quite incredible how quickly this type of information comes out.
Is circulating. Well, let's have a look at what the Mail's got to say, because the Mail is introducing the idea of blunders. And this is going to take us down a very interesting route. But basically, we're told that two of the key terrorists were actually stopped by the police on the A2 motorway between Paris and Brussels just hours after the attacks, and they were then released. Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose that's what you do. So what then unfolded? Well, we're going to say the black shirts have then taken over. So we're told there's been massive movement by heavily armed French police and indeed French military and special forces, some 128 raids, thousands of police and the military on the streets. Remember, of course, that in France, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Mike, but you haven't got civilian police. The police are, in fact, all military in their background.
No, yes, the police are military, the gendarme are civilian, and then you've got another layer even below that, the like village bobby sort of thing. So yes, they've got a militarised police.
Right. The reason I mention that, of course, is because in other places we're seeing a drive towards the militarisation of police in other European countries, including Britain, of course. And this would make sense of Bernard Hogan-Howe calling for more armed police. We'll just add a bit to that previous Mail slide here, because this was the second key comment. By the time they alerted Belgian authorities, this is the French police, the men had abandoned the car in Molenbeek, a suburb of Brussels, notorious for its Islamic extremists, and they disappeared. So incompetence, Mike, or this story is just not real, so forth. There's no substance to it. Well, we'll leave people to think about it. But let's come back to the French. What's the French president said? He's described the attacks as an act of war and says France's reaction would be pitiless. To which I'm going to say, does this mean that he's going to get involved in torture? We could get back to what took place in, of course, North Africa. French have done it before, so we're not interested in international law, trials, truth and justice. We've already got the movement towards a shoot-to-kill policy, I think.
Yes, and there is one politician in this country criticising that, but of course, in response, he's being called Jihadi Jez.
This is Mr. Corbyn, is it? Yeah, so there we are. The French are going to go flat out, shoot on sight. We don't want any witnesses. We certainly don't want any investigation about what's happened in courts, because the truth could come to the surface. And as you're going to cover a bit later, somebody else is digging hard to get the truth out about what's happening here. That truth would be dangerous to the state. So how does it get better? Well, the Mail, of course, is trying to make some sales out of this story. Police in Serbia arrest a migrant carrying the same passport as that found close to the French suicide bomber, fueling speculation ISIS are using forgeries to fool investigators. Now notice the language, fueling speculation, as if this is all quite new. We're not too sure. Well, this is the comment. Serbian police say the document in the name of Ahmed al-Mohammed, 25, was the same as the one found on an ISIS corpse outside the Stade de France. So there was a corpse at an ISIS corpse.
Yeah.
But it's got the same passport. Yes. So was it the passport that identified the corpse?
You do wonder.
Not too sure. Well, for just £2,000, journalist Nick Fagg obtained the same forged Syrian passports being used by ISIS fighters to trick the authorities into believing they were asylum seekers. So this is the news for today. We get the impression that somebody somewhere knows something about passports, but it's all a bit vague. Well, let's jump back to this, which is a Fox interview of this very journalist, and let's see what was said. Well, the Fox interviewer here said, "Where did you hear you could buy for $2,000 these perfect copies of Syrian passports and driver's licenses?" And Mr. Fagg replied, "I was first aware of this by a report by the chief of the European Union border agency, Frontex. I went to Turkey. The forger told me members of ISIS were using these to create new identities." So there's a definite trail here, but have a look at this, because this interview was on the 18th of September this year. So we're just going to ask, so what action did the British security services and border agencies take to protect the UK and demand action of the EU, because their border agency already knew where the trail to the so-called ISIS terrorists were? This is a scam, Mike. Yeah. It is blatantly obvious that what the British public are being told is a complete lie, and this appears to be a deliberate attempt by the Daily Mail to weave in a story where this should have been headlines asking what action Britain's security services were going to take in order to stop potential attacks. This can't be real. It just can't be real. Well, let's have a look at Frontex. Here we are. Here's their website. This is the European Union border agency. And let's read what they say. Under Origin, fostering the free movement of people has been an important objective of European integration since the 1950s. Free movement of goods, persons, services and capital were identified as foundations of the community in the Treaty of Rome. It then goes on to talk about the Schengen Agreement, allowing free internal borders. So this is the EU removing all the controls that have given nation states security, including Britain. They remove the border controls, and when they get told, well, actually, we've now got terrorists moving through, they don't tell anybody about it. Well, what else do you need to make this system work? You need calculated incompetence. So let's bring in this lady. We've shown her many times before. Lynn Homer, trained by the political charity Common Purpose, created a shambles in Birmingham City Council. Birmingham was described as a banana republic for electoral fraud. Under her hand, the rule book was thrown out the window. What do you do with a lady like that? Well, you make her chief executive of the UK Border Agency, where she presided over years of chaos, when of course we had no idea who was coming into the country. It was so bad under this future Common Purpose leader. The Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration's report has shown that insurances given by senior UK Border Agency officials to the Home Affairs Select Committee about security checks and the size of the backlog appears to be incorrect. I believe what they're talking about is lying and falsifying of the figures. That's what I believe. So we can't secure our borders because we've got people who are incompetent in charge. What do you do with people like that? You promote them to the Department of Transport, and after chaos ensures there, you promote them into the Treasury. Presumably, she's helping to create the £1.9 billion to fight the terrorists. Well, when she's not helping Starbucks pay the minimum tax. And of course, senior civil servant, as was Gus O'Donnell, head of the civil service, welcomed the appointment of Lynn Homer and said she had a wealth of experience and she'd be allowed to excel in her new role. Well, I think she has, hasn't she? Because we've got a complete breakdown of security. We've now got UK facing the biggest terrorist threat it's ever faced.
Clearly, we need to send her to the EU.
We should send her to the EU Border Agency. Well, let's have a look at where the problem really lies, because, of course, these things don't happen by accident. It's real people that cause the trouble. And we're going to say that the Westminster puppet show goes on as MPs call for immigration restrictions, knowing that they've treasonously given power away. So this is a complete shambles, but it's deliberate. We're going to put in here, because we're going to talk about immigration, the solution is not anger at the immigrants. We've got to replace these very devious, hypocritical and treasonous MPs. So this is the headline that says it all. David Cameron's EU negotiation can't ignore immigration. David Cameron consistently lying to the British public about immigration when he knows that he can't do anything because he's given powers away to his German and European colleagues. And of course, we've seen in the news reports what that has produced, massive movements of people causing problems for every single country that they come through. Where do we go for an appropriate comment on this, Mike? Do you think the BBC might be a good place
to go? Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at what Andrew Marr has had to say. He says, "What then can be done with those who resist immigration and multiculturalism, apart from, of course, widespread and vigorous interbreeding, which is the best answer, but perhaps tricky to arrange as public policy? The final answer, frankly, is the vigorous use of state power to coerce and repress." So here is a major spokesman for the BBC talking about using immigration and its inherent problems in order to increase state power to coerce and repress. And of course, Mike, that's exactly what we're seeing with the arming of the police, more money spent on state surveillance. But Andrew Marr's in good company. Have a look at these quotes. This is General Wesley Clark, American general. "There is no place in modern Europe for ethnically pure states. That's a 19th century idea, and we're trying to transform into the 21st century, and we're going to do it with multi-ethnic states." So this is planned policy here, Mike, coming into the European Union. We'll bring in another one just in case viewers are unsure what we're talking about. This is Strobe Talbot, President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State, and it's a quote from Time, July the 20th, 1992. "In the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognise a single global authority. national sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. And let's link it to where it belongs, which is the UN. So here we've got Julian Huxley from UNESCO. There are thus two tasks for the mass media division of UNESCO, the one general, the other special. The special one is to enlist the press and the radio and the cinema to the fullest extent in the service of formal and adult education of science and learning, of art and culture. The general one is to see that these agencies are used to contribute to mutual comprehension between different nations and cultures, and also to promote the growth of a common outlook shared by all nations and cultures. The task is to help the emergence of a single world culture with its own philosophy and background of ideas and its own broad purpose. Do you think that possibly that purpose could be the common purpose? Common purpose would fit very nicely. So there we are. We know that the policy in the background is, of course, to break down nation states, and that is exactly what is being carried out now, not only by David Cameron's British Conservative government, but also with the help of the EU and the USA. So this is a key question. Many people worried about immigration at the moment. We simply ask, did Britain's Muslims fight their way ashore? And there is only one answer to that. No, they were invited in. And we say, who is the enemy? The innocent people invited, or the politicians who opened the door without any proper consultation or debate in Britain? And it has also been members of the Muslim community warning about what the British government has been up to. Let's jump back to comments made by the then chairman of Birmingham Central Mosque. This is going back a few years, Dr. Nazim. He likened Britain to a police state. He was then hounded and vilified in the press. If Britain were like Nazi Germany, the Muslim population in Britain would not be as numerous as it is today, would it, Dr. Nazim? That's a lovely comment by the Scotsman. Scotsman, yeah. Or in this case, the Nazi calling the non-Nazis Nazi, but Mohammed Nazim, chairman of Birmingham Central Mosque, urged Muslims to show respect. In fact, many Muslim leaders were urging restraint at that time, but of course they were ignored by the mainstream press. And here we are. One recent tradition of this country is for Nazim to compare the UK with Nazi Germany and to dismiss the threat of Islamic terrorism as a government plot. So Dr. Nazim, going back 3-4 years, I think it is now, was warning that Islamic terrorism was going to be stoked up and used as part of government agenda. And I'm very happy to sit here today and say Dr. Nazim was absolutely right in the warnings that he was giving. And so it went on, but absolutely vilified, and none of the statements which were about what was happening in reality in UK, very brutal actions by the police, none of that was ever reported properly in Britain's mainstream media. But it made David Cameron hot under the collar, and he hit out, he rounded on the Muslim leader, as it says here. I think this is a Telegraph article. Apologies, Telegraph, if it wasn't. Cameron said Dr. Nazim, is completely and utterly wrong, and I think that's not responsible at all. So we now see what David Cameron has unleashed in this country. I rather think that's not responsible at all. So how's it all been done? Well, let's just follow it through. We've shown this. The public in Britain have been sold the massive immigration, the need for massive immigration, on the lie that we can't produce anything as a nation, we haven't got the people. You introduce the race hate laws to make sure that nobody can criticise what's going on. You increase immigration by an EU open policy. You collapse the border controls, as we've just shown, and that facilitates the movement of criminal gangs, increasing crime and breaking down law and order. You label immigrants as asylum seekers to gain sympathy and alienate anybody who speaks out. You disperse asylum seekers throughout the country to hide the scale of policy and also to raise tension. and you introduce diversity training to suppress national opinion and empower the newcomers. Again, the aim of that is to raise tension. And then we have positive discrimination in the promotion of immigrants and minorities above other citizens. What is the aim of that? To raise tension. And then you agitate and inflame the situation in order to bring in what you really want, which is that increase into the police state, the armed police, and of course state surveillance. And if people are unsure of what we're really getting at here, we are describing UK at the moment as a life raft. It doesn't actually matter what your colour, where you've come from. The threat at the moment is a dictatorship installing itself off the back of a so-called terrorist threat.
And of course, if you look at the rhetoric in mainstream politics in the United States and in Europe, lots of comments about not mixing up the terrorists that carried out the Paris attack with the migrant population.
Right.
The intention to have exactly the opposite effect, of course, is to get people thinking that these people came in with the migrant population, take it out on the migrant population as a whole, rather than on the governments that actually caused the terrorism in the first place.
And I'm going to say we're already now starting to see some comments on the UK column chat box, absolutely going back to the propaganda which is pushed out in order to get this hate and agitation up. This is an attack on everybody in the UK. Of course, we can't blame politicians. Who's really to blame for this terrorist attack? And
we're going to come on to that in a moment. Right. Yeah, we are. But in the meantime, the person that's getting the blame is Edward Snowden. Well, he's got blood in his hands, apparently. So a whole bunch of people coming out and blaming Snowden. Even Boris Johnson got in on the act, according to this article on RT. And he said that to some people, the whistleblower Edward Snowden is a hero, not to me. It's pretty clear that his bean spilling has taught some of the nastiest people on the planet how to avoid being caught. And when the story of the Paris massacre is explained, I would like a better understanding of how so many operatives were able to conspire and attack multiple locations without some of their electronic chatter reaching the ears of the police.
So Snowden's fault.
It's all Snowden's fault. He blew the whistle on what the NSA, the GCHQ were doing, and they're not able to do that anymore because of what he said, and therefore all the chatter that must have been going on in the social media that might have given a clue to what happened in Paris wasn't noticed.
Did Snowden start the war in Iraq?
Don't think so.
Or Libya?
No.
Okay. Afghanistan?
No.
Syria?
Not that I'm
Probably
aware of.
Not,
no.
But it's his fault.
It's his fault, yeah.
Right. Okay.
And of course, the other question: did Snowden provide millions of pounds to terrorists in Iraq and Syria?
No.
I wonder who that was. We might come on to that in a moment. G20, of course, has been going on in Turkey over the last couple of days. And on Sunday, apparently, Vladimir Putin sat down with many of the leaders of the G20. And, well, he had some pretty hard comments for some of them, because he said that he provided examples based on Russian data into the financing of different ISIS units by private individuals. This money, as they have established, the Russians, comes from 40 countries, and there are some of the G20 members among them. So that's probably not a surprise to very many people watching this program, but it may have come as a surprise to some of the people that Putin was speaking to, that he was prepared to say that quite so directly to them at the time. So in the meantime, of course, the Russians have now announced that they've identified foreign explosive material on the wreckage of the aircraft that crashed in Sinai, and they're saying traces of foreign explosives. Putin, as a result, has said that he will fine and punish anyone behind the attack, and he said that Russia's hunt will go on indefinitely, and they'll find out who the individuals were. We'll look for them everywhere, wherever they're hiding. We'll find them in any corner of the planet and punish them. Well done. In the meantime, they have issued, apparently, according to Sputnik here, a $50 million reward to anybody who can tell them who is responsible for this. Well, I'm afraid I've got to say, Mr. Putin, you've got to give that to us, because I think all roads stop here.
I think it's absolutely true. I think we could probably use $50 million.
Yes, might do some good with it. But anyway, in the meantime then, yesterday there was the meeting of the European Defence Agency. Well, what are they about? The European defence faces challenges today and even more tomorrow, according to them. Challenges that will require capabilities that address diverse threats and maintain Europe's technological edge within constrained budgets. One approach to these challenges is by having a priority to defence and increased collaboration between Europeans. The European Defence Agency was created 10 years ago to support and enhance this cooperation. EDA is providing an important catalyst to pooling and sharing defence and security capabilities. Okay, so on the screen there is Mr. Konrad Bruck, who is Director of Defence at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Luxembourg, and he represented the Vice Minister and Minister of Defence of Luxembourg, who was otherwise engaged with meetings, and gave the speech that Etienne Schneider should have given. And he said things like, we welcome work on a global strategy that will encompass all the tools at our disposal to create a stronger and more secure Europe. And he was using language like, we need to become more effective in facing crises. We have the right tools and structures at our disposal. And he was urgently needing to move to a common approach to European defence. And this was a key part of all the speakers yesterday at this conference. This was a key aspect of it, a common approach to European defence. So he was followed by this lady, Federica Mogherini, who's the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs. She's also the Deputy President, the Vice President of the European Commission. She was echoing those sentiments, and she suggested that we need to blur the lines between military and civilian institutions. And this is where we start to see hints that the police should be militarised. And she also made it clear that EU treaties already have the necessary clauses which would enable the EU army, and these clauses may be invoked in the coming weeks. So I think probably if we look at this, we would say that Paris is probably not enough to invoke those clauses.
Well, it's nudge, isn't it? Start to drift them in, get people used to the idea that they're being discussed.
Well, of course, the concern's got to be, as Patrick said on last night's Crane Report, that Paris won't have the legs as a news story to bring such a thing about. It's going to require maybe another attack or two in other parts of Europe to keep the momentum going, and that's I suppose got to be the danger. But then she was followed at the podium by Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, and he was placing a focus on EU and NATO complementar. That's not even an English word. They want to join up, the EU and NATO, and get much stronger partnership in facing common challenges. So this idea of a common purpose and common challenges and common defence, this and common culture, it's very much a common theme, shall we say. And European security is interconnected, he said. It's not something we should do, but something we must do. So this was the theme of that conference, absolutely. And I suppose to a certain degree echoed by some of the commentary from the United States over the weekend. This was Lindsey Graham saying, let's form an international army. I'm trying to protect America from another 9/11. Now, of course, the idea of for at least having a coalition is something it looks like Putin is up to in the United Nations. And this looks like another attempt to, well, it's more than an attempt. It's another checkmate gambit really going on here, because of course if he is trying to force the UK, Europe and the United States to get involved in his fight against ISIS, this really backs Cameron into a corner that he can't get out of, doesn't it? Because if he does try to get out of that corner, he's going to expose himself for the, am I allowed to say, for the terrorist that he is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see the pieces come in bit by bit. I'm told that at the moment, high levels of the British military, we're talking senior officers, are like rabbits in the headlights as they watch policy just being formed on the hoof around them. So, of course, British military capability being cut to the bone, while David Cameron says, well, we've all got to be terrified we're about to be attacked. He's then working the integration into the European army. And as I say, senior military officers just sat there. They haven't got a clue what's happening around them. But I understand that one or two of them that have been informed what's really happening, too scared to move. So what a state of affairs at the moment. Senior British military officers too frightened to stand up and defend their own country from what is clearly subversion from within it. Cowards, I think, is an appropriate description, Mike.
Well, many people may not be aware, but this is Parliament Week. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Parliament Week apparently is a programme of events and activities that connect people with Parliament and democracy in the UK. There's something for everyone, apparently, whether you attend or organise an event or simply take part in conversation online. Well, that's good. But I just wanted to highlight this tweet from the Cabinet Office from John Penrose, Minister for Constitutional Reform. A democracy is only as effective as the people who are engaged in it. And I have to say, for the first time, I actually agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm going to agree with that. It's absolutely correct. Anybody who isn't standing up and holding these idiots to account has no right to claim that they live in a democracy. And really, we've got to I don't know what put David Cameron in prison. Is that a good start?
Well, I think there's got to be a trial first. That's certainly required. There's got to be due process, Mike.
Yeah.
Prison comes later.
Yes. So what is David Cameron up to, and Osborne? In fact, well, they are busy breaking the country up because, of course, the age of nation states is long gone. And they have just announced today the West Midlands Combined Authority Devolution Agreement. Here we are. And this is the Chancellor's devolution revolution, apparently, which has hit the West Midlands, with a major devolution deal agreed with local leaders, which includes £1 billion of government investment. And what they've done is they've created a West Midlands Combined Authority Shadow Board, and they met with George Osborne today in Coventry, and they've put pen to paper to this. So what did Osborne have to say? He said, "Today we're announcing a collaborative way of working that would not have been countenanced in this region just a few years ago." So they're creating not the Northern Powerhouse, but the Midlands Engine. Apparently this is the Midlands Engine. And Osborne said, we want to make the Midlands engine Britain's engine for growth, and this deal will give the region the powerful levers it needs to make that happen. So what are they up to? Well, they're giving them responsibility for consolidated devolved transport budget with a multi-year settlement to be agreed at the spending review, responsibility for franchise bus services. Well, this seems silly, but really what's it about? They are creating a mayor and a massive super council, which is going to run the entire West Midlands.
So this is your city region.
Yes.
This is your city region coming in here, Mike. And of course it's called devolution, but actually what it is an extension of state power. Something we've been hearing recently is that within local authorities, people with an investigatory
We're having problems
position.
today.
I have, yeah, sorry about that. But people who, for instance, are responsible for council tax, where if something goes wrong, they're going to investigate. These people are being taken over by DWP, which is in turn going to be monitored by the Crown Prosecution Service. So we talk devolution, we talk as though the power is being given away, but actually what it is, the power is being brought into these local areas.
Well, the key word there is collaborative way of working. So they're going to they think they're getting more power, more self-determination, but in fact, it's going to be a collaboration, and every move they make is going to be studied by government, and they better make the right moves. Basically, is what that's about.
Well, let's put up this as something to end on for people who may not believe that there is a policy and there is method in what is being formed around us. But we've got here Peter Dennis Williams Sutherland. he declared in 2012 the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine the. I'm going to have trouble with that one as well. Thank you. Of European countries. So this is basically policy. This is UN policy coming through here. The aim is to break down nation states, and one of the methods of doing this, of course, is to break down the borders and to start mass migration by starting the wars. And if we have a look at the background of this man, UN Special Representative for Migration, Chairman of Goldman Sachs International, Vice Chairman of the European Roundtable of Industrialists, Steering Committee member of Bilderberg, Chairman of the London School of Economics, International Board member of the US Middle East Project, Chairman of the Trilateral Commission Europe. So here we have the real policy coming in as to what's to be done. And of course, the puppets carrying out the work are the ones we see, the policies coming from a much higher level. So are we going to be murdered in our beds? We don't think so. What's unfolding at the moment is a deliberate policy, which is to break down nation states, mass migration, and the fear of terrorism, of course, a part of that. Where are the real domestic terrorists? They're in Westminster. We'll give Putin a call after the programme, Mike.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is really a stage where things are getting very, very serious in Britain and, of course, in Europe. It's up to all of us to do something about it. It's not enough to sit tweeting and chatting. What we need is real action for people to get out, warn other members of the public, and to take their MPs in particular to task. So we'll say thank you very much for joining us. We will be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.